I'm just curious, among the students here, how many of you are familiar with the term micro VC? Okay, sir, would you, if you could tell us your name and tell us how you would define micro VC.
Sure, my name is Joshua. Micro VC is a fund that raises up to 100 million or less.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And what else would you say? Is there any distinction that, so it's a smaller fund, right? Anybody else want to add anything else in terms of, I'm not expecting you all to know about micro VC, but does anyone else have any other things they might say as part of how you define a micro VC? Anything else besides fund size?
Investment size is pretty much like 25K to 500K, typically seed stage investments.
That's right. Typically seed stage. We'll talk, I mean, there's no like common, I mean, actually curious, Ed, if you would define it any other way in terms of check size.
Yeah, I would have said before seeing your deck that maybe micros were smaller and did even pre-seed investing, maybe angel investments. I'm a co-founder of 2 small micro funds, and our deal size is typically $100,000 per transaction. So the ones that the micro fund environment, the ones that sort of band together and do these syndicate deals, are often very small. They at $100 million, you've got some real capital. You could maybe even do some Series A investing at that size.
That's right. Well, let's talk a little bit about our backgrounds. Actually, Ed, you just started talking about some of your funds. Why don't you talk a little bit about how your law firm, your practice, and your interest in micro VC?
So I did go to law school here. I graduated in '90, and after a clerkship, I went to a large law firm called Cravath, Moore, doing cross-border billion-dollar M&A deals. I was a junior associate, but it's pretty heady traveling the world doing that. But I always had like I said, a passion to start something, to build and create, and I just couldn't get away from it. I kept thinking how exciting that would be. And so in the late 90s, I started the only thing I knew how to start, which was a law firm. I had no idea what I was doing. And I learned about not only the business of venture law, because that's what type of work law firms could get back then, small law firms, startup law firms, but also the business of law itself, how to get a malpractice policy, how to get a lease, how to set up payroll and all of that. And as I said, it was the late 90s, so deals were falling out of trees, hitting me in the head, these venture deals. It was the go-go times, Internet 1.0, and it was very exciting, and I just fell in love with the types of deals that are being done, mostly tech. And my office, one of our main offices in New York City, and at that time, and still to this day, Somak will tell you more about it based on his portfolio as well. New York City, what does it do really well? It does web-enabled services, because there's so many people with deep vertical domain experience in advertising and healthcare and financial services, that businesses built on those verticals that were really web-enabled, tech light. So what New York is not doing is building big hardware companies or chip companies. So those are the deals I started doing, and I began representing companies because they were easier to represent as a lawyer, young lawyer with not much experience. And in the early 2000s, I was involved with the raising of my first fund that I was involved with. I wasn't a co-founder of it, but helped raise the money and incubated it, and began then representing the funds. And the more I worked, we now represent around 36 venture funds. The more I became interested in how funds work and the vetting of deals and learning more about the exciting things that were going on around the Northeast in terms of venture. And I got talked into co-founding a small fund called Angel Round Capital that we're now investing out of our second fund, and that is really a micro fund. We have less than $10 million under management. And we'll talk more about that there, but the secret sauce there is it's a member-led fund. A few years after that, Somak and I both were involved with a micro fund that isn't his current fund, Armory Square. It's called Female Founders Fund. My daytime job is still as a practicing lawyer. That's how I pay the bills. And we probably do 50 to 60 venture deals a year. And I can talk a little bit more about the legal side. The real expert here is Somak.
He's being very modest. Thank you so much. So as you can see, we'll talk more as we go through some of our case studies that besides being a lawyer for some of our transactions, our paths have intersected across numerous funds and companies and investments. So we're looking forward to a fun discussion with all of you. So I started my career late 90s as well. So when Ed was referring to the go-go 90s, I graduated right at the tail end. I wish I graduated just a few years earlier so I could have experienced a little bit more of the upside. But I vividly recall, I don't know if some of you here seem like you might have a little more experience, but how companies would be founded just out of the Obanpa. Is the Obanpa still here in Harvard Square, or is it no longer? It's still here, right? No?
Yeah, they just relocated.
They relocate. Okay, well, the old Obanpa here, as well as the one in Kendall Square, is where a lot of the business plans would be funded when I was just an undergrad at MIT. And so, then we had a nuclear winter, and now in the last really 5-6 years, venture capital in New York has seen a real renaissance. So I started my career initially on the investment banking side at a firm that's now a division of Jefferies. I hated investment banking, which is ironic because I later was part of a venture fund affiliated with an investment bank. But I've now come to appreciate the value they bring to bear in our industry. I just didn't like the overall environment, the culture, but I learned a lot. But early on, I got the startup bug, like many people did in the 90s. I stuck with it a little bit longer. I joined one of our clients that's today known as Shopping.com. It was one of the first comparison shopping engines on the web. This predates Kayak. eBay was just around, but it wasn't as big as it was today. The company ultimately went public, was acquired by eBay. I was an early executive at a team called company called MedTower, which was a precursor to Garrison Learman Group. It focused on the healthcare vertical, so knowledge experts on demand for healthcare. Those were the lean and mean years of the early 2000s when the venture capital markets had dried up and nobody was investing. So I learned probably a lot more about my business of helping companies scale through tough times through that experience, learning how to manage funds when we could barely pay payroll and keep the lights on. We ultimately sold that business. And then after a stint with one of the largest trade associations representing the software industry, I was recruited by Edison Partners, which is now, I think it has about $1 billion under management, focuses primarily on expansion stage investing, which is generally more later stage investing. Like many funds, when they get successful, sometimes they amass a lot of capital and then the partners get more conservative, and it became a bit more later stage focus when I joined. But the focus of that fund, and Ed has also done a lot of work with Edison Partners. Edison was a real pioneer in the 80s for developing a model focused on investing in underventured regions, really being the first institutional investor in regions that were completely ignored by the rest of the venture industry and making a lot of money doing that. I was there for a few years, opened the New York office. I realized my passion was really in early stage. I thought I could add a lot more value at the early stage versus late stage. And I was recruited by my former fund, which is now known as Tribeca Venture Partners. Was there for almost 7 years and became a partner in the early aughts. 2010 or 11. And then I got the entrepreneurial bug, and I was recruited by a group of institutional investors and family offices to launch my own fund, which we'll talk about later, called Armory Square Ventures. We focus on not just New York City and the Northeast, but also Tier 2, Tier 3 geographies, regions that are really, again, ignored by much of the venture industry, where we can be the first institutional capital. It's been a really exciting ride. We'll talk about some of the exciting successes and challenges we've had as raising that fund. That's a little bit about our background.